The cold wind howled through the empty streets as Maria pulled her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders. The city never slept. But for people like her, people who had nowhere to go and no one to turn to, the night was just another battle. She sat on the sidewalk near the entrance of a high-end restaurant, watching people walk past without a second glance. Her stomach ached with hunger, but she had grown used to it. What she could never get used to was the way people looked at her, if they looked at her at all. And then he came, Jonathan Miller, the millionaire, the man who owned half the businesses in the city. He stepped out of his luxury car, dressed in a suit that probably cost more than Maria had seen in her entire life. His shoes, polished to perfection, clicked against the pavement. As he strode toward the restaurant, his presence demanded attention. And the moment he arrived, the valet rushed forward. The doorman straightened his posture, and even passers-by stole admiring glances. Maria hesitated before speaking. She had asked for help before. Sometimes people ignored her. Sometimes they gave her a few coins. And sometimes, like tonight, she had to swallow her pride just to survive. With a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "Sir, could you spare some food? I haven't eaten in days." Jonathan stopped. His sharp blue eyes flickered toward her, scanning her with an expression of disgust. He let out a dry chuckle, shaking his head. "You people are all the same," he said, his voice dripping with arrogance. "Begging on the streets instead of working, expecting handouts instead of earning your way." Maria's face burned with humiliation. "I've tried," she murmured. "I lost my job. I lost everything." Jonathan scoffed. "Excuses?" he said coldly. "You think life is unfair? Life is what you make it. No one ever gave me anything for free." He reached into his wallet, pulled out a crisp $100 bill, and held it up. But before Maria could even think of taking it, he let it slip through his fingers. The bill fluttered down, landing in a dirty puddle at her feet. "There's your help," he smirked. "If you really want it, pick it up." Maria looked at the money, then back at him. Her eyes stung with tears, but she refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. Slowly she stood up, turned her back, and walked away. Jonathan chuckled again and walked into the restaurant, completely unfazed. To him, it was just another encounter with another beggar, a moment he would forget before he even finished his expensive meal. But fate has a way of turning the tables, because one day, everything changed. Jonathan Miller never thought about that night again. To him, Maria was just another face on the street, just another person who didn't try hard enough, who expected life to hand them something for free. He had built his empire from the ground up, clawed his way to the top, and believed anyone who failed simply wasn't strong enough. His life continued as it always had. Meetings in glass towers, extravagant parties with the city's elite, and endless deals that made him richer by the minute. He was untouchable, or so he thought. But life has a way of humbling even the mightiest. One evening, months after that encounter, Jonathan arrived at an exclusive charity gala. The event was buzzing with reporters, wealthy investors, and celebrities, all gathered in a grand hall decorated with golden chandeliers and flowing champagne. Jonathan didn't care much for charity, but these events were good for business, a way to keep his name in high circles. As he sipped his drink, a waiter approached him. "Sir, the keynote speaker has arrived," the young man said. Jonathan barely paid attention. These events always brought in some motivational figure. A former athlete, a best-selling author, someone with an inspiring success story. It was all predictable. He turned toward the stage, expecting another cliché speech about hard work and resilience. But when the speaker stepped up to the podium, his glass nearly slipped from his hand. It was her, Maria, but she was nothing like the woman he had humiliated on the street that night. Gone were the tattered clothes, the hopeless look in her eyes. She stood tall, poised, dressed in an elegant gown. Her hair was neatly pulled back, her face radiant with quiet confidence. The audience applauded, unaware of the storm brewing inside Jonathan's mind. Maria took a deep breath before she spoke. "A year ago," she began, "I was homeless. I lost everything, my job, my home, my dignity. I begged for food on the streets, not because I was lazy, but because I had no other choice." Jonathan stiffened in his seat. The memory of their encounter resurfaced in his mind like a bad dream. She continued, "Some people walked past me without a second glance. Some showed kindness, and some chose to humiliate me." Jonathan's jaw tightened. He could feel the weight of her words pressing down on him, but no one else in the room knew what he had done. He was safe, for now. Maria's expression remained calm, but her voice carried an undeniable power. "One night, I realized something. People like me don't just need help. We need opportunities. We need a chance to get back on our feet. And thanks to a stranger's kindness, I got that chance." Jonathan exhaled slowly, his grip on the glass loosening. She wasn't talking about him. Someone else had helped her. Someone had done what he refused to do. She smiled at the audience. "Today, I stand before you as the founder of the Hope Initiative, an organization dedicated to giving homeless individuals the tools they need to rebuild their lives. Because no one should be defined by their worst moment." The room erupted in applause. People stood, cheering for her, praising her resilience. But Jonathan remained seated, frozen in place. The very woman he had looked down on had risen far, beyond anything he could have imagined. And now, she was in a position of power, one that could crush his carefully built reputation, if she ever chose to tell the truth. That night, Jonathan couldn't sleep. He tossed and turned, replaying their encounter over and over. He had always believed that wealth was proof of worth, that success was earned through pure determination. But Maria had been determined. She had tried, and when she fell, instead of lending a hand, he had stepped on her. The thought disturbed him in a way he couldn't explain. The next morning, he made a decision. For the first time in years, Jonathan took a step back from his empire. He started looking at the city differently, not through the tinted windows of his luxury car, but up close. He walked through the streets he had ignored for so long, seeing the people, the struggles, the stories he had dismissed. And for the first time, he felt something foreign, guilt. Then, fate intervened once again. One evening, as Jonathan was leaving his office, he spotted Maria outside. She wasn't alone. She was speaking with a group of volunteers, handing out meals to those in need. She looked at home here, among the very people he had once believed were beneath him. Jonathan hesitated, then took a deep breath and walked toward her. She turned, her eyes meeting his. There was a flicker of recognition, but she said nothing. She simply waited. His throat felt dry. Apologizing was something he wasn't used to, but he had to. Not for his reputation, not for his image, but because, for the first time in his life, he wanted to be better. He opened his mouth to speak, and then Jonathan hesitated, his usual confidence nowhere to be found. Maria stood before him, her expression calm, but unreadable. She didn't speak first. She didn't demand anything. She just waited. And somehow, that was worse than any words she could have thrown at him. He swallowed hard. He stopped, exhaled, and tried again. "I owe you an apology." Maria raised an eyebrow but said nothing. "I was wrong that night," Jonathan continued, forcing himself to meet her gaze. I looked at you, and I judged you without knowing anything about your story. I believed I understood the world, but I didn't. I was cruel. A beat of silence passed. The street around them buzzed with life. Cars passing, voices in the distance, the scent of fresh bread from a nearby bakery. But in that moment, it felt like they were the only two people there. Maria studied him, her eyes searching his face. "Why now?" she finally asked. "Why are you here?" Jonathan exhaled. He could have said a dozen things. That her speech changed him, that guilt had eaten away at him. But none of those explanations felt real enough. Instead, he told the truth. "Because I don't want to be that man anymore." Maria's expression softened, just slightly. She crossed her arms. "And what exactly do you want, Jonathan?" He thought about that. He had spent his entire life chasing success, power, wealth. But standing here, in front of someone who had built something meaningful, he realized how empty all of that was. "I want to help," he said finally. "If you'll let me." Maria studied him for a long moment before she spoke again. "You can't just throw money at a problem and think it fixes everything." "I know," he said quickly. "That's not what I want to do. I want to understand, to actually do something that matters." Maria nodded slowly, as if considering his words. Then, to his surprise, she handed him a paper bag. "There's a man sitting on the next block," she said. "His name is Daniel. He hasn't eaten today. Go give him this." Jonathan blinked. "You want me to—" "Consider it a start," she said simply. He hesitated, but then, without another word, he took the bag. As he walked toward the next block, his mind raced. He had spent millions on charity galas, had written checks for causes he barely understood. But now, holding this simple bag of food, it felt different, real. When he found Daniel, the man looked up with tired, wary eyes. Jonathan handed him the bag, unsure of what to say. Daniel took it, nodding in gratitude. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough from exhaustion. "What's your name?" Jonathan hesitated before answering. "Just someone trying to do better." As he walked back, something shifted inside him. Maybe this was just a small step, but for the first time in his life, he felt like he was walking in the right direction. When he returned, Maria was still there, watching him. "How did it feel?" she asked. Jonathan thought for a moment before answering. "Different," he admitted. "Important." Maria gave him a small smile. "Then maybe there's hope for you yet." And for the first time in a long, long time, Jonathan Miller believed that too.